All right, let's jump right into this explainer and decode one of history's most fascinating and honestly most misunderstood symbols. If you've ever looked at ancient Egyptian art, you've absolutely seen it. But today, we're going to unpack the massive layers of meaning completely hidden inside the Djed pillar.
So, here's the core mystery. We see this pillar everywhere in Egyptian ruins. I mean, it's carved into monumental temple walls, painted on the sides of elaborate sarcophagi, and buried as tiny amulets in the sand. But what exactly is it? A simple building column? Some kind of stylized tree? Or is it something far more biological and, frankly, magical?
To crack this open, we're going to hit 5 key areas: decoding the Djed, the myth of Osiris, biology and earthly origins, raising the pillar, and finally, magic in the afterlife.
Okay, part 1. Decoding the Djed, the symbol of stability.
To build our foundation here, we have to realize this isn't just some basic architectural support column. The Djed, which is known in the hieroglyphic index as R11, translates directly to the concept of stability. But more profoundly than that, it represents a divine spine. Specifically, the backbone of Osiris, the Egyptian god of the afterlife, the underworld, and the dead. When the ancients drew this, they were literally drawing the pillar of resurrection.
Now, you know the ancient Egyptians thought in pairs to establish balance, right? Well, they frequently paired the Djed with the Tayet, also known as the Isis knot. When you see these two hieroglyphs together, you're looking at the ultimate visual representation of duality. The Tayet represents life and welfare, tied to the goddess Isis, while the Djed represents the unshakable stability of Osiris. Put them together, and you get the complete cycle of existence.
Moving on to part 2. The myth of Osiris, a truly wild tale of resurrection. To really understand why this symbol became the spine of a god, we have to look at a high-drama myth involving murder, deception, and a magical tree. It kicks off with a brutal betrayal. The god Set tricks his brother Osiris into stepping into a perfectly fitted coffin. Once he's in, Set seals it up and flings it straight into the Nile River. The coffin washes out to sea and lands on the shores of Byblos in modern-day Lebanon. There, a sacred tree rapidly takes root and grows completely around it, totally hiding the coffin inside its trunk. The local king is so intrigued by this magnificent tree that he actually cuts it down to use as a central pillar in his palace. Eventually, Isis tracks it down, earns a favor from the royal family, and successfully extracts her husband's hidden coffin right out of that wooden pillar.
Once she freed the coffin, the myth tells us that Isis consecrated that leftover pillar. Just picture the sensory experience of this moment for a second. The rich, heavy scent of myrrh being poured over the wood, and the careful, reverent wrapping of the pillar in fine linen. Through this deeply intimate act, Isis birthed the very first Djed pillar, completely transforming a piece of Syrian timber into a permanent Egyptian symbol of endurance.
Part 3. Biology and earthly origins. We're going from reeds to spines.
Before it exclusively belonged to the Lord of the afterlife, this symbol had roots planted firmly in the earthly dirt. Evolving over thousands of years, early agricultural cults likely used fertility reeds or sheaves of grain tied to a pole. Over time, the symbol got associated with Sekka, the falcon god of the Memphite necropolis. Then it passed to Ptah, the patron god of craftsmen, who was actually called the Noble Djed. It wasn't until the New Kingdom era that the Djed became firmly and exclusively locked in as the symbol of Osiris.
But here's where it gets incredibly biological. Get this. Researchers Andrew Hunton Gordon and Calvin W. Schwabe theorize these famous symbols stem directly from ancient cattle culture. They propose that the Ankh represents the thoracic vertebra of a bull viewed in cross-section, and the Djed, they argue it physically represents the sacrum of a bull's spine. This is deeply tied to a pretty surprising ancient Egyptian belief that semen, the very essence of life, was actually created within the spine. So the Djed is literally a physical, biological anchor of creation.
All right, part 4, raising the pillar at the Djed festival. Now that we know its origins, how did the ancient Egyptians literally bring the symbol to life? Well, that happened at the Djed festival, specifically during the month of Koyak. This was the agricultural season of inundation, when fields were sown. The raising of the Djed was this massive ceremonial act representing Osiris triumphing over Set. By physically hauling this pillar upright, the pharaoh and priests were appealing to Osiris to bless and resurrect the new seeds in the ground, perfectly mirroring his own resurrection from the dead.
To wrap your head around the massive scale of these events, listen to this vivid description of Amenhotep III's ceremony at the Luxor Temple, noted by historian Sigrid Hodel Hones. She details a scene just overflowing with fowl, cucumbers, lotus blossoms, breads, and cuts of beef piled high on offering mats. There are vats of oil and bundles of lettuce everywhere. It's an incredible description that truly grounds us in the lavish, sensory details of the royal jubilee offerings. The Egyptians were literally feeding the divine to ensure the absolute stability of their empire.
And hey, this wasn't some quiet, solemn church service. The ceremony was dynamic and it was loud. Reliefs show the pharaoh and priests hauling on thick ropes to pull a massive Djed pillar upright. Above them, the vulture goddess, Wajit, spreads her protective wings. The pharaoh's daughters are vigorously shaking Hathor sistrums, these percussive rattling instruments that just filled the air with rhythm. And down on the ground, there were actual boxing matches and rhythmic stick dances that you can still see performed in Egypt today. It was a vibrant, highly physical celebration of strength.
Finally, Part 5, Magic in the Afterlife and Amulets for Eternity.
Let's talk scale for a second, because the sheer size of the myth reenactments at Abydos, the primary cult center of Osiris, was staggering. We're talking massive theatrical productions, utilizing huge amounts of props and personnel. Historical records note 34 reed boats carrying statues of the gods, 365 ornamental lamps burning brightly, hundreds of priests acting out the roles of deities, and dozens of golden Djed amulets used to focus the magical energy of the rituals.
For the deceased Egyptian, the Djed was deeply personal magic. Amulets of the Djed were essentially magical spinal implants for the dead. They were placed directly near the spine of mummified bodies, and even painted right onto the back of coffins. According to specific spells listed in the Book of the Dead, this amulet ensured the mummy would regain the use of its spine. It allowed the deceased to literally sit up, walk, and live eternally in the afterlife with absolute stability.
And, the symbol's power echoes globally. Academics have noted striking visual and thematic parallels to symbols in other ancient cultures. For instance, scholars point out deep similarities between the Djed and the sacred trees associated with the Assyrian god Ashur, as well as the Sumerian god of male fertility, Enki. In both cases, you have this erect, pole-like symbol representing life, stability, and divine power standing firmly beneath the celestial heavens. Now, here's a mind-expanding connection for you. Scholars have actually linked the ancient Egyptian Djed to the concept of Kundalini, the spine of energy in Eastern yoga. Think about it for a second. Both of these traditions focus on the human spine as a central, divine pillar of life force. It's a conduit where dormant energy is raised up to achieve ultimate spiritual awakening and eternal stability. The parallels across human history they're staggering. So I want to leave you with this thought. If a single pillar can represent the literal spine of a god, the agricultural stability of an entire empire, and the eternal energy of the human soul, what everyday symbols in our modern world carry that kind of hidden magical weight? I hope this explainer has changed how you view the ancient world and leaves you wondering what profound meanings are hiding in plain sight around us today.